This happened when we were going through the redwoods in California. This was a very remote part of California, so there were no cell phones or any kind of communication we could have used. The sun had not come up yet, and it was in one of the most isolated parts of the state. Or so it felt. I'd been camping with 5 friends in a very deep patch of forest in Northern California. We spent our days hiking around the woods, exploring, huddling around campfires at night to keep warm. My friends and I were all experienced hikers who thought we knew how to survive out in the wilderness. But this time, we went off trail for an adventure hike through one of the longest areas, which led into a heart of a mysterious part of the Redwood National Park, what we believed to be a secluded area. Due to how dense the foliage was, we assumed it had been remained unexplored by man for who knows how long. We knew we were getting deep into the remote areas, and the further we went in deeper, the deeper it became. It became more of a green labyrinth of trees that grew thicker and denser towards the center. We told ourselves that if we got lost, which was unlikely, I had gone on this type of expedition many times before, and it would be easier to find our way back by following our own footsteps until we bumped into a familiar landmark or area. Now, the sun set at around 6 p.m., giving us about 6 hours of sunlight left for hiking through this unknown, uncharted part. As night approached, my friends decided they wanted to take a break from hiking, just to relax, so they could recoup their energy for tomorrow's adventure. They built this huge fire, and we sat around, telling stories and eating. All sorts of stories. The night forest became alive with strange shadows dancing on the trees. But we kept our spirits high, telling stories of haunted places near where we lived back home. We talked about how frightening it would be if an axe murderer could get into your house, or even to find out in this dark wilderness where absolutely nothing was familiar. We laughed at each other for being scared, and after a few minutes, one of my friends put along a song of Elvis Presley. We all started singing along to it. Afterwards, we all stared deep into the fire pit and began to talk more about what scary things are out there. I'm sure some of us were thinking about Bigfoot or other monsters that supposedly live out here. At first, we all kind of agreed nothing really scary lives out here, and we were just kind of freaking ourselves out. And then strange stories began to come out more and more. One friend said he knew a story of a ghost apparently that lived up by a lake, and you could die just by looking into it. Yet another friend talked about how many people disappeared into Oregon's national parks, never to be seen again. David Paulides, missing 411, you know, the whole gamut. They talked about hidden creatures deep in cave systems, which people were being taken into. Yada yada yada. One of my friends even claimed he once saw Bigfoot while hiking through Nevada. Every time somebody told a new story or took the rabbit hole deeper, it would just freak us out more, and then we'd laugh and make fun of each other for being scared. And we kept reassuring ourselves, there's nothing dangerous out here. Stop. But then everybody would jump as we all heard a sudden noise, which sounded like it came from a large animal. And then there was silence. That's when I began to think about how scary this deep forest was actually becoming. We were pretty far out here. I took my friend's story about Bigfoot seriously and started to tell them ghost stories. I told them about this Sandman who climbs through your windows while you're sleeping and steals your soul, never letting it return again. It's a character in children's books that comes at night and puts dust on your eyes. My friends were like, whatever man, you're so full of crap. But I laughed and even got a little freaked out myself, because they kept talking about things being in the woods. Of course, I mentioned the Sandman thing to be jokingly, of course. But then, one of my friends sees movement over by one of the trees, which is covered in shadow. She screams and says it looked like somebody or something was trying to shake the tree behind it. We all look, and to our horror, there actually is something there. This large figure moving behind the tree. My friend thinking it was a trick of the light or dark, grabs his flashlight, shining it in that direction, illuminating this partial figure. And just like out of a movie, we saw that this thing had these deep glowing eyes. That's when we all began screaming, jumping up from our camping spots, running to the tents. Some of us were grabbing weapons, while others were huddling in the tents for safety. This thing was thrashing through the brush, wailing like the most twisted, terrible animal you could imagine. We turned on our flashlights, desperately trying to defend ourselves with light, in case it came at us. But really, what would that have even done? Thankfully, we didn't see anything out there again that night. I can't sit here and say I'm an expert about what we saw. We were terrified. Nobody else knew exactly what they were seeing either. But I've never been so frightened before in my entire life. And for days after that, everybody was talking about how scary those woods are, or where it did go. We knew we weren't imagining things, because everybody saw it. Even I. And I was probably the least scared out of all of us. Even just a little freaked out. The weird thing is, we never reported the incident. It was as if we had all mutually agreed that it wasn't our place to tell anybody. I mean, we were probably trespassing on private property as it is. Nobody else should really know about this, right? In fact, the only reason I'm even sharing this story with you guys, I figured you could use more stories like this to put in your books or read to your audience, whatever. And also because I never want to see a thing like that ever again. So please, don't let me ever go camping again. But if you do, make sure you and your friends are drunk first, in case you run into seeing a Bigfoot, or so I think we did. I've always had a fascination with the deep woods. I grew up hearing stories of strange creatures like Bigfoot and critters like the Loveland frogman. Now, even as a kid, I was absolutely fascinated by these tales. Some people might think it's just kid stuff, but at night, when my parents would go to sleep, I could never fall asleep because all I could ever do was think about what lurked within the forbidden and mysterious forests that surrounded our tiny little town in here in California. It had been almost 20 years since they tore down the old abandoned factory, right near where we lived. So, therefore, there weren't any more scary urban legends for me to be deathly afraid of. My parents said it used to be an evil place, where bad people did things, like satanic rituals, animal sacrifices, that sort of thing. The story they told me, though, was of a man whose daughter got kidnapped while playing in the woods by something they referred to as the man with no face. Supposedly, he had no face, and if you ever saw him, you would die. They just used to scare me with that story. I mean, I guess my fascination with scary stories and experiences began pretty early on in life. As a kid, I really wanted to have an encounter with some sort of being from beyond. Growing up, there were many times where we went camping or hiked into what anybody would call the deep woods, right? With friends or hiking excursions, or even hunting and fishing. I've done it all. My father said that this particular forest area here in Cali was once thriving with bears and other wild critters. I always thought that was pretty cool. He said that in the early 1800s, it was actually one of the largest uncut forests in all of Cali, and there were thousands of buffalo roaming. My parents would tell me things like these in hopes to keep me out of the forest. They knew how fascinated I was with them, but sometimes my brain just couldn't stop thinking about what lived deep within its mysterious walls. I would sneak off for an hour or two by myself. The area I live in is similar to a haunted woods type setting. Lots of creeks, some of which run through waterfalls, old abandoned homes and factories, small lakes, big rocks and boulders, caves, sometimes hidden, and other natural formations with cool names like Devil's Slide and Devil's Punch Bowl. It's a very secluded area that hardly anybody ever goes to. I mean, it's so hard to get to. But I'm sure if you put in the time to get there, you would for sure have an encounter with something. I remember one day, after hours of fishing on this particular lake that is surrounded by woods on both sides, which pretty much describes any lake, right? Gosh, I'm terrible at descriptions. But I digress. There weren't any birds chirping or squirrels running around. The forest had gone silent. Pretty disturbing. On top of all that, we noticed how unusually dreary and foggy it had gotten all of a sudden. This was a warm day, with a clear, beautiful sky, just not even 30 minutes prior. It wasn't even foggy in the area, so where did this come from? I think maybe we get about 2 days a year where you can't even see past 20 feet. This was strange. We all figured it was from some sort of, well, we don't know. I guess I'm not really sure what to even come up with. I really have nothing to explain it. So we ended up packing up and heading back towards the car. We took this as our sign to abandon ship. The path we took through the woods were on both sides very thick, lots of overgrowth, bushes, and brush. Now to your left, there was this old abandoned dilapidated house. Then to your right, lots of full rocks, boulders, and eventually, if you went the path, it would actually take it to a cool waterfall. In that moment, I was so wrapped up in my own thoughts that my friend and I didn't even notice the figure. It slowly came closer, and when we finally noticed, we saw this eerie black figure walking towards us from another path. We got a really bad feeling instantly. We stopped dead in our tracks, looked at each other, wondering, what could this thing be? And waited for it to come and get us, for maybe a second, just trying to process and frozen in place. My heart almost beating out of my chest. But I couldn't run. Something inside me was telling me if I ran, this thing was going to catch us. Now, to describe to you what on earth this thing was, I can't. It was glitchy, if that makes sense. Electrical. It looked like a living, moving physical shadow of a man with an electrical outline, or kind of like a VHS tape does when it glitches out. Very staticky. It's terrifying. I mean, it made no sound, but you could feel this thing's energy projected onto us. We fled, without even hesitating another second, somehow able to fully convince our body to run. Now, this thing continued to pursue us. We ran and we ran, paying no mind to if this thing was really pursuing us further. I think at one point or another, I think we lost it. We had stopped to catch our breath, and the forest around us had begun to come back alive. I remember hearing the birds and thinking, oh, that's a wonderful sign. But the eeriness was still there. The feeling you could cut with a knife of dread was still lingering. We knew we couldn't stop in this spot for long. We were quickly looking around, in case this thing decided to show itself. Like I said, the forest was so thick, you couldn't see past 10 feet in front of you. It's amazing how something as dangerous and terrifying as what we just saw could blend right into its environment. We made it out, alive and in one piece, they would say. We never talked about it after that, but my friend and I still talk about it to this day. At least, we didn't talk about it for a long time afterwards, so only recently have we begun to talk about it again. Hopefully that's not too confusing and you understand me. Anyway, we mentioned to each other and recounted the events, just to make sure either of us were not crazy. We both remember it the same as the other. I'll leave you with some advice. If you find yourself walking alone through the woods on any given day, don't be so sure that there aren't paranormal entities around you, able to go in and out of this very existence that we live in.